Hey all, this episode includes some spicy language and details about abuse, residential schools, and intergenerational trauma. Please take care while listening. Leticia Racine is 13 years old. She's just finished grade 8, and the summer of 1990 is shaping up pretty well.
Alan had got a little business, a little miniature golf course that he set up out at Lake Metagosh and put me in charge of it.
It turns out working for her dad is a pretty sweet gig.
All the kids from the lake, that's where they would come, and we'd hang out. And of course, I'm the ringleader because I was the boss of this thing, and so I was the cool kid.
She's riding pretty high until her mom, Sandra, breaks the news.
She said, I'm going to leave Alan.
Leticia is skeptical. She's heard this before. Her parents fight a lot. But the more Sandra talks, Leticia realizes this is really happening. Her mom has a new place for them to live in a nearby town. Leticia isn't sure what she's feeling, but whatever it is, she wants it to go away.
I could feel things were changing. And it wasn't like, I want to go get drunk. It's just, I want to do something to not feel this.
So later on, she meets up with a few other kids.
We seen this cabin, nobody was home, and so let's just go check it out and see what we can find. It was my idea. It was me leading them.
And it just sort of happens.
We break into this cabin, we ruffle through it, we steal the change, and there was liquor there. So we took the liquor. And then we went back to our little hangout place there at the miniature golf, and we drank. But that's what we stole. We stole liquor and change. Probably maybe $20.
The next day, the local police pull into her family's yard. Her dad manages to smooth things over with the cops, but that's not Leticia's only worry.
And I was like, okay, all right, so we're in the clear. I was like, don't tell Mom. I remember him saying, I'm in enough trouble as it is. I have to tell her.
Things have been tense between her and Sandra for months, and threats are flying.
My behavior had gotten so bad, too, that she had always told me that if you don't smarten up, I'm going to put you back in care. That was always the threat.
Still, she doesn't really believe Sandra would actually send her back. Her parents fought all the way to the Supreme Court for her.
And I was like, go for it. Never, ever thinking that she would, because she fought so hard for me. I'm adopted. She can't put me back in care.
I'm Falen Johnson. This is See You in Court, a podcast about the cases that changed Canada. This is Racine and Woods, Part 3. The story of how an adoption dispute over one little girl shaped how courts decide what's best for other Indigenous children all over Canada. Dawna Dingwall is here with the next part of the story. So Dawna, let's recap a bit. Leticia was 7 when the Supreme Court ruled that it was in her best interests to allow Sandra and Alan Racine to adopt her.
That's right. They were really the only family she knew, and she'd been living with them for 6 years at that point. So the court said the bond she had with them was more important than her connection to her Ojibwe Dakota birth mom, Linda Woods. Things settled down after the trial. Leticia is busy with kid stuff like school, 4-H, church, sports. But having grown up in Deloraine, I can tell you it's a pretty white town. And even though there's a Métis community nearby that she lives in, Leticia sticks out as being visibly First Nations. Sandra and Alan take her to at least one powwow, but it doesn't really mitigate this growing sense she has of being an outsider.
I was an Indian amongst a white community. And I was adopted. And, like everything made me different. And so as I grew older, it just became more and more evident.
And what's also evident is that Alan is struggling with alcohol. That makes it even harder for Leticia to lean on him for support the way the court suggested that she might.
Right. And the court's thinking was that because of Alan's Métis heritage, he could help Leticia through some challenges she might come up against.
Yes, and it's also complicated because Alan's dealing with his own family's history. His mother is a residential school survivor.
Never was it ever talked about, right? But he didn't have any pride in who he was. Like they could say that they were proud to be Métis, but in reality, they were ashamed of the Indian part of them. And as much as I wanted to connect with my dad because he was more my color than anybody, he couldn't do it. He couldn't provide it.
Pretty soon, her own heritage is an almost daily source of shame.
It was always the national anthem that would just make me cringe, because every time that they would bring up our home and native land, I thought everybody was looking at me, and I felt like ashamed of that. I hated it. I hated the national anthem because it had that word native in it. I'm pretty sure it was around this time when I would come home and try and wash my skin off and try to figure out how I could not be brown anymore.
As Leticia gets older, these emotions come out in other ways. She's caught cheating at school. She's lying and bullying other kids, including her own brother and sister. And Sandra and Alan are not happy.
That's what they told me. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, what's wrong with you? You're fucking crazy. Why are you acting like that? I don't know why. So I just thought that I was bad.
When these fights are really bad, Leticia packs a bag and tells herself she's going to find Linda Woods, her birth mom. She doesn't really know how to do that, but she does know Linda can ask to see her when she turns 12.
Right, because Linda has been told by a judge no contact until Leticia turns 12.
Yeah, so Leticia focuses on that. She's constantly checking the mail as her birthday approaches, but she never hears from Linda. Her behavior escalates after that. By 13, she's stealing smokes and sneaking out of the house. And then, as we heard, she breaks into that cabin with some friends.
Right, and this is when the cops show up at her house.
Yes, and when her mom, Sandra, finds out, she threatens to put Leticia back into foster care, something Leticia thinks she won't follow through on. But that unthinkable thing, it actually happens. Sandra calls Child and Family Services.
She made me sit there while she was on the phone with them. It's just, I just can't handle her anymore. Like, you gotta come get her.
The next day, Leticia puts her bags in the car and says her goodbyes.
The last one I said goodbye to was Alan. And I was just like, can I stay with you? And he's like, no, you can't. I was like, why? You got this big fucking house. We can do this together, man. I'm your daughter. And he's like, I can't. I'm sorry. Just broke my fucking heart, man. I couldn't stop crying after that because I was losing my family. Like, I was being kicked out of my family.
They get to the office in Brandon. Leticia refuses to speak to anyone. Sandra leaves, but then Leticia sees her coming back up the steps a few minutes later.
And I was like, oh, maybe she's coming back. She's changed her mind. And then she came up and she gave me $20. And then she left.
Leticia's now in foster care for the second time in her life. But this time, she's a teenager, not an infant. and she's living in Brandon, Manitoba, not the Turtle Mountains. And to small town kids like us, Brandon is a pretty exciting place. It's only 40,000 people around that time, but there's a mall, a McDonald's, movie theaters. And for Leticia, being in Brandon opens up all kinds of new things.
I got a taste of what it felt like to be free when I was in that foster home. I was in the city and I had access to drugs and alcohol like I'd never had in a small town out in the bush. There were other Indian kids. It was no longer, me being the only Indian and a bunch of white kids. It was, I was amongst my own people. My own kids were just as fucked up as I was, right? I really loved that. I really loved being around other Indian kids.
Of course, she's still devastated by what happened, being put back in care. Her trust in Sandra is broken. So when it's decided about a month later that she should move back in with Sandra to start the new school year, Leticia's reluctant, but she goes. That arrangement lasts 6 months before things break down again. Leticia's partying, acting out, so Sandra puts her back in care. They'll try once more after this, and that lasts just a week.
So that's a lot of back and forth. And this sounds like what some of the experts predicted in court, that the adoption might break down when she's in adolescence and trying to figure out who she is.
Right. It is kind of a textbook case. And during one of the stints that Leticia is back in foster care, she starts to look for her birth family. She remembers the big brother who hugged her so hard at that first visit.
I would ask every Indian that I met if they knew Jason Woods, because I knew that if I connected with him, I would connect with Linda. Finally, it paid off, and this one girl was like, yeah, I know Jason Woods. He lives out on my reserve with my cousin. And I was like, holy shit, let's go. Let's go.
Leticia hitchhikes to Swan Lake Reserve, and Jason is there. It's hard to know who's more excited.
Oh, he was so happy, right? Still protective and loving over me. We're so happy that you're back. We love you so much, and always calling me little sister. And, we'd party together, and he was the coolest man in the whole friggin' world, to me.
Jason tells her there's a big powwow at Long Plain. A whole bunch of their relatives will be there, and he lets them all know Leticia's coming home.
Everybody knew I was coming, and it was just a big deal, right? They made me feel like it was the best thing in the world. And
she meets aunties and uncles and cousins, and the one person she was really looking for, Linda.
I know she wasn't gone. I knew someday she'd come back. I'd pray that she would come back.
After that reunion later in the summer, Leticia decides she wants to live with Linda.
And she surprised me in Thunder Bay.
I knew that I just wanted to be around her. I wanted her to be my mom.
Leticia's hopeful, but adjusting to living with her birth mom in Thunder Bay is not easy. Linda's busy, she's remarried, and has younger kids to look after. Leticia and Linda aren't bonding the way Leticia expected.
My mom wasn't healthy. She quit drinking, but she's not healthy, right? She didn't do anything to work on her trauma. So she was still toxic.
On top of that, she feels like an outsider in a family where she thought she would finally belong.
The culture shock, right? It soon became evident that I wasn't like every other Indian. The way they spoke, the way they thought, and the way they interacted with one another. I was still very white. I was that proverbial apple, white on the inside and red on the outside.
And this is a thing that many Indigenous people feel when they try to come back to culture and community, that they don't fit in. They might look the part, but they certainly don't feel it. I imagine it's hard for a kid who never felt like they fit in to finally land in a place where it's all supposed to make sense and it just doesn't feel right.
This is exactly it. So after a few weeks of living in Thunder Bay with Linda, Leticia steals a truck and takes off back to Manitoba with her little sister Lucy in tow. They steal food and gas along the way, and eventually they get caught. Leticia ends up in jail. And that's where someone asks her a question she'd never been asked before. Who are your people?
I think I said Cree, because I didn't even know. I just thought we were all one people. I wasn't ever told that I was Ojibwe, Dakota. That wasn't ever a conversation growing up. I remember being, introduced to the medicines, right, to the sage, and I just remembered smudging for the first time there.
This is so much. That this connection to culture comes while she's in jail in an institution. It's so complicated. And I can see why it stays with her, this smudging in jail.
Yeah, but it is hard to hold on to that when she gets out. She can't live with Sandra. It didn't work with Linda. She's back in foster care, so she's pretty lost. And it's right around this time she and a friend, another foster kid, decide to run away. They steal a car. When they need money for gas and food, they rob an elderly couple at gunpoint. The search for them becomes huge news. Duo Armed and Dangerous is the actual headline underneath their mugshots in that story I saw in the paper. They steal 11 cars over the course of a week, and they head west before being taken down by a SWAT team.
This seems like a pretty serious crime. What happens to Leticia this time?
She does 2 years in jail, and it's pretty hard time. She even joins a gang, but she also gets a job helping the warden and earns extra privileges. And when she gets out, she joins a program in Winnipeg that provides educational upgrading and a job placement. And it's here she meets some very important people.
That was the first time I had ever spent any quality time with Indigenous people who were healthy and strong.
She's referring here to the people who run the program, Catherine Morisseau Sinclair and her husband, Murray Sinclair.
This is Justice Murray Sinclair, who eventually heads up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yes, this is back in the 90s, and then he's one of the chief provincial court judges. And what Leticia doesn't know yet is that she and Murray Sinclair already share a connection.
I remember him sharing with me that he remembers my case like he remembers me,
He remembers her because Murray Sinclair worked for the lawyer who represented Leticia's birth mom at the Supreme Court.
Wow. So even without knowing, he was involved in her life.
Yeah, and it makes what happens next really significant. She's invited to her first sweat lodge with the Sinclairs.
I just remember me and him being in that sweat and the firekeeper and the prayers that were offered up in that ceremony probably saved my life. I didn't even know who I was at that time. But because he knew who I was, the prayers that he prayed for me, I think, carried me through more than I realize. because I went through a really, really difficult time.
The truth is, Leticia needs those prayers. She's about to face a huge decision that's going to change her life. Just after Leticia turns 19, she finds herself in a situation that more than a few young women can likely relate to.
I got pregnant, and when I found out I was pregnant, I just wanted to come home.
She's in British Columbia, and her boyfriend isn't interested in being a dad. So again, her instinct at this time, it's relatable.
And just wanted my mom. So I came back to Manitoba and I went back to Sandra's.
Despite everything, Sandra is still the one Leticia turns to most often when she needs help. Sandra is the one who gets her to rehab when she needs it, who helps her apply for college. This time when she asks for help, Sandra sends Leticia to Winnipeg, where she goes back to school.
I went to Anishinaabe-Owaji. It was an Indigenous program for youth. Got my GED, and I managed to stay clean and sober, right? Because I knew how to do it, and I knew it was the right thing to do. I just had the strength to do it.
And according to Leticia, Sandra has some other advice. She suggests Leticia should give the baby up for adoption.
Sandra was like, "You're not capable of looking after a kid." And I was like, "You're probably right."
And just a reminder, Sandra declined to speak to us for this podcast, so this is based on Leticia's recollection. Leticia goes into labor on a Friday night in February and gets herself to the hospital. She's on her own, no family or friends. She delivers a healthy baby girl. When she holds her baby for the first time, she can't imagine letting her go.
That love that you have for your first kid, right? Like, I never knew that existed. And so I changed my mind. I had decided I was going to keep her.
Then she makes a phone call to tell Sandra about her decision.
And she's like, absolutely not. She said, "You are not keeping that baby. You are not capable of raising a child. And you're not going to disappoint those parents after you told them you were going to give them a child. You're not going to do that to them."
After that, things get even more complicated. A nurse tells Leticia her mother is downstairs. And she means Linda, her birth mom. Leticia hasn't seen Linda in years, but somehow word made it to Long Plain that Leticia's in labor.
My daughter's having a baby, I want to be there, I just want to hold my granddaughter.
Leticia remembers pleading with Sandra on the phone, telling her Linda is at the hospital and the baby can go home with her to Long Plain instead of to the couple who signed on to adopt her.
And she said, absolutely not. She said, no. She says, those people will be able to give her a better life.
By now, Linda's making her way up to see Leticia and the baby. But Leticia tells the nurses she doesn't want to see her.
They stopped me there. They said, "She had her baby, she had a girl. You can't go in." I said, "Okay."
Leticia goes through with the adoption. She breastfeeds her daughter over the weekend. And then she has to say goodbye.
I had to carry her down to the lobby and give her over in the lobby of the hospital. And I remember just like collapsing, like when I had to give her up.
I should explain here that Leticia is telling this story when we're sitting at Linda's kitchen table in Long Plain. And this is the first time they've really talked about her daughter's birth. And Leticia tells Linda that she made a mistake that night.
That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And one of my biggest regrets, not giving her to my mom. Yeah. Because she'd still be with her people, today. If I'd given her that chance.
Oh, don't be sorry. There's a reason for everything. Always a reason for everything. She's a beautiful girl. Mm-hmm.
After the birth of her daughter, Leticia tries her best to keep up her sobriety. But there's a lot of ongoing trauma in her life. At times, she turns to even harder drugs to cope. And over the course of the next 13 years, she has 3 more children. And there are periods where she's really healthy and able to give them her best. But there are other times when she can't be the kind of parent she wants to be.
I just wasn't ready to do it, the healing, right? And so it always ended up with jails, institutions, and, near death. I'd sober up for a while and then things would get really, really good. Just almost too good.
Eventually, Sandra pretty much takes over raising Leticia's second daughter, and her middle son lives with his father.
Okay, but earlier you said she has 4 kids.
Yes, her youngest son's name is Thunder. And a few years after he's born, Leticia hits one of those kind of rock bottom moments. She's in the throes of heroin addiction when Thunder's dad gets gravely ill and doctors tell her he might not make it. So even though she's pretty much lost all faith, Leticia asks God, the Creator, for help.
The only thing I could pray was, Creator, I'm sorry. And I heard him say, everything is going to be okay, my girl. I felt him. I felt those words. I knew I'd been changed in that very moment. And I've never stuck a needle in my arm again since then. That was 9 years ago. And, it's taken a long time, right? Like to heal from that trauma. I finally was able to do the work, do the steps, and I combined that with culture and ceremony. And eventually, it just kept getting better and better.
And all of that work leads to some pretty remarkable accomplishments. Leticia becomes a support worker at the program where she recovered. And then she helped start a street outreach program in Regina. And today, she lives in Prince George, BC with Thunder, who's 16. She's a wellness coordinator for the Residential School Survivors Society there. And she does a lot of work with 60 scoop survivors.
I know there are so many survivors who struggle or who don't make it. It's not an easy road. And now here she is helping others find themselves.
Yeah, and she calls herself a returning warrior of the scoop. And she's been front and center in efforts to get apologies and compensation. But even with all of the strides she's made, Leticia says she is still wrestling with the legacy of Racine and Woods.
It's really confusing and overwhelming even, right? But it's something that's I've got to go through, that I've got to work through. I mean, it's brought to me for a reason. And so I'd really like to know my position and have a clear understanding of what Racine versus Woods' impact was or continues to be for our people today.
I can imagine that must be such an odd feeling and so confusing. And I would be curious about that too. You know, I know people who were scooped, people who were in care, and it does make me wonder how Racine and Woods comes into play in cases involving those people, those Indigenous kids.
Yeah, and the person who can explain this better than me is Professor Raven Sinclair. She's an expert in, as well as a survivor of, the 60s scoop.
I'm from George Gordon First Nation in Treaty 4 in Saskatchewan. I am a professor of social work and current dean of social work at Blue Quills.
Professor Sinclair is often called as an expert witness in those cases. And when she goes to court, she testifies that the vast majority of Indigenous kids who are fostered or adopted try to find their way back to their people and their culture. But she says her expertise is overshadowed by Racine and Woods with its focus on the importance of bonding. Here's what usually happens in court.
It didn't really matter what I said, because as soon as Racine and Woods, that case was sort of articulated or voiced or invoked, that would take precedence. I mean, it sort of enshrined the bonding to foster parents as some sort of a holy, thing that couldn't be disrupted.
Professor Sinclair sees the legacy of Racine and Woods as a continuation of what she calls the Indigenous child removal system.
So the negatives of this ruling are no secret, but all these years later, have there been any positives from Racine and Woods?
Well, like a lot of court decisions, there's more going on than meets the eye. The judges saw Leticia's adoption as interracial, and by supporting it, they were signaling that families aren't just about biology or traditional notions of what a family is. Think about today, kids who have two moms or dads or a single parent, blended families.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and a lot of people who have studied this case will say the spirit of the ruling, putting the best interests of the child first, was absolutely the right thing to do. But they'll say the judges got it completely wrong when it came to Indigenous kids and what's best for them.
So, if we know all of that now, why is Racine and Woods still being used to make these decisions?
It is kind of perplexing, but no other ruling has definitively challenged it. But now there is some legislation that pretty much takes direct aim at Racine and Woods, Bill C-92. And it says immediate family are the first choice to look after Indigenous kids taken into care, followed by extended family, and then families in the child's First Nation and other First Nations need to be considered next. And the last resort is putting a child in a non-Indigenous home. And Professor Sinclair says, while C-92 doesn't spell the end of Racine and Woods, she has seen outcomes change in court when she brings it up.
It was like 4 days after I submitted my report that the case was done and the child was returned to their Métis kin, because it's a federal law. And so it doesn't matter what you think of our culture. It doesn't matter how long this child's been in care. If my extended kin or my relative, if I can take them and can prove that I have the capacity to do so, that child's coming to me. And I love that. I think it's really, really important.
How does Leticia feel about the case and ruling now?
Her feelings about the court's decision are obviously really complicated. When we first spoke, she told me that she leaned towards feeling like the court got it right, that it was better for her to stay with Sandra and Alan. They loved her. On top of that, her siblings, Linda's other kids who grew up on Long Plain, they struggled as much or more than she did. But over time, as we did this story, Leticia's thinking evolved.
I did get a good education, have certain privileges in that extent, but I didn't have ceremony. I didn't have culture. I didn't have identity. I didn't know who I really was. So, that bond that they say is so necessary and so important, and the reason why, it was the best interest of me to stay there, it didn't, and it wasn't the most important thing. It didn't trump culture. It didn't trump ceremony. It wasn't the most important thing. Despite those gifts that I did get, in the end, I would have rather been with my people. Bar none.
How about Linda and Sandra? Do you have a sense of how they see Racine and Woods today?
Linda has been able to reconcile some of her feelings around all of this and around Sandra.
I do not have no ill feelings at all for her. I don't. I feel sorry for her. And I'm glad. I'm glad she loved Leticia. I'm glad she did that.
As you know, Falen, Sandra didn't do a recorded interview for this podcast. And Alan, Leticia's adopted father, he died a few years ago. I did, though, have a chance to talk to Sandra a few times. And to be fair to her, I want to share a few things that she told me. Like a lot of people, Sandra felt that being a foster parent was a good and helpful thing to do. She says the media portrayed her unfairly during the trial, and she told me that she loves Leticia and she did the best that she could in raising her.
The relationship Leticia has with both of her mothers is so complicated. How about Leticia's relationship with her own kids? What does that look like today?
She's working on that too. Leticia knows where the daughter she gave up for adoption is, and she's hoping to be a bigger part of her life down the road. Thunder, her youngest, is 16 and he lives with her. And everything that's happened to her, it has a direct influence on how she's bringing him up. In so many ways, Thunder has what Leticia didn't. She's raising him in his culture, and she's incredibly proud of that and of their relationship.
The connection and love that I have for my youngest son, and the privilege I have to raise him. Out of all four of my children, he was the only one I was able to raise. And he's a stellar, healthy young boy. He's cultural and proud of who he is and knows who he is, knows his purpose here. And I'm just so proud of him, and that's a reflection of me, right? And so I'm really proud of that.
Thanks, Dawna, for bringing us Leticia's story. All 3 episodes are in our feed now. Please share them with a friend. Next week on See You in Court, we're taking you to the Big M Drug Mart. Find out how the plucky Calgary store changed the way Canadians shop forever. The show is hosted and produced by me, Falen Johnson. Dawna Dingwall wrote and reported this story. Catherine Robeson is our senior producer. Sam McNulty is our sound designer. Carla Hilton is our executive producer.